understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How you doing there? It is podcast time. I hope you're not driven too demented by what is going on in the world.
I am.
But we will get to you in a minute. But before I get to you, John, have a listen to this.
Yes. And Gibraltar as a young girl where I was a flower of the mountain, yes. And I thought, well, as well him as another. And then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes. And he asked me, would I yes, to say yes, my mountain flower? And first I put my arms around him, yes. And I drew him down to me, so he could feel my breasts all perfume, yes. And his heart was going like mad. And yes, I said yes, I will, yes.
Yes, David.
So, John, this podcast is going to be... You're getting very excited there.
Yeah. What is that, first of all?
That is the last few lines of the soliloquy of Molly Bloom, which is the end of Ulysses. Okay? And this podcast is going to be called The Molly Bloom Approach to Economic Transition.
Yes.
Exactly. So what Molly Bloom is saying there at the end, she's just so you know, for you Joyce aficionados, you'll know what it's all about. If you are not, this is the wife of Leopold Bloom. Her name is Molly Bloom. Her original name is Maria Tweedy, and her nickname was Molly, and therefore she married Bloom. She became Molly Bloom. It's the final scene. He's in bed with her. It's the end of the day. Well, in actual fact, it's the morning. There's the following morning, because Ulysses is all about one 24-hour period. And she's just thinking about the world. But she's thinking about the power of yes. Joyce himself described yes as the female word. And he said that the word indicates acquiescence, self-abandon, relaxation, and the end of all resistance. He called it the most important word in the English language. And I think what he was saying was that yes opens up possibilities where no closes down options.
Yeah.
So when you say yes to things, when you're open to things, when you are, and of course it's heavily sexualized, the whole thing, because she's talking about all the fellas she was with before, saying yes to them and all that sort of,
Right.
she's talking, it's really interesting. So much of use is a stream of consciousness. It's your own private thoughts. But she's basically saying, here's my fella beside me. I've just had an affair with blazes boiling that afternoon, right? And the bed is still warm with the scent of boiling, right?
Jesus.
Now my husband is in the bed and he really doesn't know anything about me. He doesn't know anything about my past life. He doesn't know anything. Right. So that's, and that I think is probably a fairly good description of many lives.
Yeah.
Right. There's that people have their private life and their public life and their secret life and all these sort of things. But the reason I want to talk about it is because it is about the possibilities of saying yes, to open yourself up to adventure, to wonder, to a new world, to transformation, to change.
Is this turned into a psychology?
No, because the Irish economy. So, John, what I mean by Molly Bloom economics is the following, right? It's basically, at the moment, Ireland and the whole world is obsessing about tariffs and trade. Ireland can do nothing about what goes on in the head of Donald Trump. We can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
But what we can do is we can control stuff that is within our own competence. So why don't we, as a state, use this crisis, wherever it's going to lead us, to saying we can't control that stuff, but we can change this stuff and use the crisis as an excuse to change the way we run society and the way we run the economy, and put yes before no, which is, I don't want to sound all Obama about it, but it's like putting hope before fear. And
yes,
saying,
we can.
things can be done.
And rather than NIMBYism, it's YIMBYism.
Exactly. So that's the podcast is all about opening up to possibility.
It's interesting because I hadn't heard that before, but she mentions Gibraltar.
So she's from a part of the world you know well. You know, Gibraltar, Algeciras, Tarifa, that part.
Tarifa, yeah.
That's part of Spain. Her dad is an Irish major in the British Army. Her mum is Spanish. And in Ulysses, there's a lot made of her sort of Spanish look and all that sort of stuff. But you actually know Tarifa well, don't you, John?
I do. I've been there a few times, and Joe and MT, friends of mine, go there every year and have been for the last 15 years. But it's a fantastic place. It's a real windsurfer's paradise.
It is a windsurfer's paradise, but the reason it is a windsurfer's paradise also leads to its name, Tarifa. And what we're going to be discussing, or at least the background noise against what we're discussing, are tariffs, John.
Is that where it comes from?
And tariffs comes from Tarifa.
Right,
So
okay.
Imagine the reason it's very windy is it's where two large seas clash. The Mediterranean and the Atlantic.
Yeah. It's the pinch point.
And the winds are being funneled into that particularly very, very narrow strait called the Straits of Gibraltar. And the reason the Straits of Gibraltar are important is because, as you said, that's the pinch point between the Mediterranean. That's why the Brits wanted it.
Yeah.
Because he who controls Gibraltar controls who gets in and out of the Med.
Yeah.
But predating the Brits was a geezer called Al Tarifa, and he was a pirate.
Right.
He was a Berber pirate.
Yeah.
Basically operating out of Morocco and what was then the Caliphate of Andalusia, because they were all Muslims.
Yeah.
And he used to impose a tariff on ships, right? That you had to pay this lad to get into the Med and get out of the Med. And the tariff was a tax that you had to pay Mr. Al Tarifa.
It's amazing.
And that's where the word comes from.
That's
the
amazing.
Word tariff comes from.
When you're sitting there in the evening and you're looking out over the sea, you know, you can almost touch Morocco. It's so close.
Absolutely. It's about 20 miles, is it? No, less. About 10 miles or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, if you're interested in, speaking of literature, there's a great book by the wonderful Kevin Barry, Irish novelist, called Nightboat to Tangiers.
Right.
And it's about two reformed Cork drug dealers who are waiting for one of their daughters in Algeciras, the port town. So it's basically in the port terminal, and the geezers who come and go, and they are magnificent characters. Very Kevin Barry-esque. But anyway, what I wanted from Kevin Barry to James Joyce, Kevin Barry loved that. Right? So what I want to talk to you about is the power of yes, the Molly Bloom approach to economics, because it's so easy right now to become unbelievably pessimistic about the world. And it's so easy to absorb in all the information and say, you know what? We are going back to the 1930s. We are going back into war. We're going back into a dark place. We're going back into ethnic strife. And there's no global policeman because America has decided that it's going home.
Yeah.
Right? So it's very, very easy. And the tariffs, and we know that tariffs tend to lead to capital wars. Trade wars can be the leading indicator for real wars. And if you say the 1930s is my blueprint, well, then what we had, as we spoke about the other day, we had a tariff war, which led to retaliation, which led to an increase of tensions, which led the economy to go into a vortex. And as the economy goes into a vortex, in Germany, they vote in Hitler. Hitler emerges, rearms Germany, the sort of stuff we're all talking about now. And before you know it, you have a Sudeten crisis. And our Sudeten crisis is the Ukraine. So it's very easy to tell that story. But there's another story, which is that we are going through a period of enormously positive technological change. The world is, not just Ireland.
Globally.
And if we are open to this, if we create a society that is positioned to embrace this extraordinary positive technological change, we can, and again, it's about saying yes, we could transform this society and this economy. And the idea would be to create a better place to live for everybody. In Ireland, you could do it in the UK, you could do it, but the point is...
Europe in general, though.
In order to do this, you have to be open to change.
But what you're saying, though, is this optimism could be driven by technology.
Well, what I'm saying is that if you look at the history of humanity and you look at human progress, one of the things that jumps out of the page about human progress is the following, that the reason humans got to the top of the tree in terms of evolution
Yeah.
is we're amazing problem solvers. We solve problems collectively,
Yeah.
right? But we solve problems largely with technology. So, and as I wrote in the book, if you look back at humans' use of fire, this incredible technology that we mastered, no other animal mastered.
Yeah.
We figured out how to, A, how to make it,
Yeah.
but B, how to maintain it,
Yes.
and to actually keep fires going. And then we used fires to scare other animals, to cook, to hang out and chat around the fire.
Keep
and this
warm, yeah.
sparked our imagination to keep warm. It allowed us to colonize parts of the world we could never do so.
Yeah.
Like imagine living in Canada without a fire.
Yeah.
Or
Wicklow.
or Wicklow. Imagine living in Kerry without a fire, right? Okay. So, but think about it. So our mastery of fire allowed our ancestors to colonize parts of the world, number one, to create the world more or less in our image. So, for example, the way the hunter-gatherers cleared large tracts of land, they didn't chop the stuff down, they burned it.
Yeah.
And they figured out, okay, this burning is much more effective. And then once they burnt it, what you said, the plant life that came under these very dense forests, like grasses, then we mastered
absolutely.
cereals. We said, oh, we could eat that stuff. Oh, right, bread, all that. So you can see this thing. And also what we know is that even our physical bodies changed because of fire. So our jaws become much smaller, which is why, our jaws are totally different to the jaws of a chimp, because fire does the chewing for us. It softens up the food. And by softening up the food, it makes much more food available to us to eat. So you can see all these things. So
Yeah. So that was one technology.
That's the foundational technology. But always human progress has gone with technology, right? And we've used technology to propel us forward. Now, most of the time when we think about technology, John, we think about physical technology, something that makes us stronger. So, for example, the water mill or the wheel or the steam engine. So those things animate discussions of economic history because they make sense. But there's also these other technologies, which are social technologies,
Right.
like writing, for example, so you can communicate more. So the printing press wasn't so much a machine that changed the way humans thought about the world. It was actually writing that allowed us to communicate with people. So I could write a book. Once you could read, you could then read to other people.
Yeah.
Those people could get those ideas. And suddenly you have this, what you call this mad network effect. I've always thought the legal system is the same idea. I know for most people, the legal system sounds very boring, but in actual fact, it's a documented set of rules of how to live together in a reasonably civilized way.
Yeah.
It's like the Bible's, the Ten Commandments, just, rules of don't be a bollocks, in effect. That's what Moses should have said. Don't be a bollocks to your neighbor, right? And that could have been it, right? And of course, I make the point in the book that money is one of those social technologies as well that brings people together, allows us to collaborate at scale. And by collaborating, the amazing things about humanity is that, 2 brains are better than 1. And 10 brains are better than 1.
Yeah,
And 1,000 brains are better than 1. So it's always this idea, it's like, which society progresses most? The copycat society or the genius society? And it's the copycats. So the geniuses, so you notice this, you can see that, we know lots of people who are very intelligent but can't communicate.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So they're in their own heads.
Yeah.
So that knowledge is kind of wasted, right? Because the genius can't communicate it. And when you can't communicate it, it doesn't really matter. Whereas the copycat is what humans really do very well.
Yeah.
We copy very, very well.
Yeah.
We cut and paste well. And it's the societies that say yes and then copy it can actually progress dramatically. So if you think now, the technological change that's going on in the world, from energy to AI to genetic breakthroughs in science and biology, these are phenomenally positive things if you're open to them.
Yeah.
Right? That's the whole key.
Yeah. But it also depends on who owns them as well.
Obviously depends on who owns them, and that's a legal structure. But all this came to me, John, when I was on the train from Cork to Dublin the other day. And I had
high-tech stuff.
Very high-tech stuff. But this has been open to change, right? And basically being open to what is the highest standard that we can achieve and why don't we do it? Okay? And is it because we're naturally the anti-Molly Bloom race? We don't say yes. So I had been on a train, as you know, I had been in Austria a couple of weeks ago. And I was on a train from Innsbruck to Salzburg, right? So normal train, 10 or 11 euros.
Yeah. How far is that?
It's about 200 kilometers,
Right.
right?
Okay.
The train goes 230 kilometers an hour.
Right,
And they have a
okay.
little speedometer, right?
Yeah,
So you can
yeah,
see
yeah.
it. I get on the train. So this is not swanky. This is a public train, normal thing. Sunday afternoon, jammers. There are menus on the train. So you can have lunch.
Yeah.
And again, not expensive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There are be-uniformed conductors who are speaking both German and English.
Yeah.
The trains are unbelievably pristine. The loos in the trains, John, these are things that, this is because, I'm very bizarre.
Weak bladder, that
I have
fella.
a very weak bladder, and I've also I'm the opposite of scatological. I don't like all that world, right? But you go in, and in the loos, there's this kind of wallpaper, which is kind of alpine. So it feels like serene, and they are
Scented, I'm sure.
scented,
Yeah.
exactly like a Japanese loo, right? But they are absolutely pristine.
Yeah.
Irish rail.
Right.
The point is, the trains are filthy, and you're thinking to yourself, why? So when I'm sitting in the train, it's not an unpleasant experience because we're Irish and we downgrade our expectations. But why not be like the Austrians? Why not be open to the possibility? Why not say yes to
Yeah.
the possibility of better service, of better trains? Why is our expectation of what can be delivered so low? And this goes for a variety of things. So this has got me thinking that if we are going through this period of extraordinary technological change, why is Ireland not embracing it? Why are we not like the Estonians, for example?
But are we not embracing it?
Well, look, for example, probably the most important, we spoke about fire at the top, and the thing about fire, it's an energy. It burns, it gives off heat,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it creates molecular change and it creates energy. So for thousands of years, energy has been scarce in the world because it's largely based on burning stuff. And eventually you run out of stuff to burn because you burnt it all, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, this is the great argument against fossil fuels. Isn't actually only that it's bad for the climate, but eventually you run out of stuff to burn,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's a limited
So,
resource.
so can you imagine living in a country where there is a free source of energy every day? Now, it mightn't be all your energy needs, but it's a substantial amount of your energy needs. And you think of a country like New Zealand that generates from renewables, which is hydro and electricity. We talked about Ardna Crusher last week. New Zealand generates 87% of its domestic electrical consumption from renewables. So they have invested heavily in wind and, of course, hydro because they've big lakes and mountains and rivers and all that carry on, right? So the promise for Ireland is that a significant chunk of your energy in the future could be free,
Yeah.
right? If you had said that to me at the age of 20, I would have said, you should do everything in your power for that to happen. So what happens here is we have potentially wind energy that could fuel a grid, but you'd have to build a new grid and you'd have to build the infrastructure, but the payback would be free energy. Now, once a society has free energy or something close to free energy, think about just on a day-to-day cost basis, right? How much of people's income goes on electricity? Loads.
Yeah.
Because it's expensive.
Yeah.
Imagine your society could bring that cost right down because you don't import fossil fuels, you're not importing LPG gas, you're not importing petrol to run the generators to generate the energy which the wind is generating, right? This is what I'm talking about, this idea that what we have to do is say, yes, it's possible, and yes, we can do it. So what happens here is that every time, we spoke about it last week, every time a large physical piece of infrastructure that needs to be inserted in the landscape somewhere, a windmill goes up, you get objections.
Yeah.
People do
You get the no.
they're doing the anti-Molly Bloom.
Yeah.
They're saying, no.
Yeah.
When you say, for example, why can't Irish Rail do this? You get a myriad of, well, we'd love to be able to, but we can't do it because of this, that, and the other,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right? Rather than say, yes. Rather than be in bed metaphorically with Molly Bloom saying yes. And what you see then, once you look at Ireland, and once you look at the cost overruns and all these various different disasters, what it comes down to is management, is managing the project and not using the right technology. So, for example, modular homes, homes that are built on site, okay,
Yes.
and transported using the latest technology. You don't have to do the way in which we have built houses for hundreds of years. You don't have to build semi-detached houses. You don't have to build detached houses. You can build modular houses to rapidly address a housing crisis. Have we embraced this? No. We are still building houses the way we built them in the 1950s. So it's as if the whole technological progress in engineering and materials and all sorts of stuff has passed us by.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at some of the apartment blocks now that, even in this area, you see the big lorries coming in with, ready-made walls,
Yeah.
and they're just slotting them together like Lego.
And that should be the way we do almost everything,
Right.
if possible. That basically construction should be seen as a manufacturing process.
Yeah.
And large tracts of land should be given over to new cities.
Yeah.
To build new cities. I mean, I was on the train thinking, Portlaoise, somebody built it. Somebody said, we're going to put a town here.
Yeah.
My point is, when you go on the train through Ireland, it's just all green fields.
Yeah.
Like, there is no scarcity of land here at all.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's my point. You're thinking, why can't we just build a new city here? And why can't we do it with the best technology? And why can't we do it with the best technologists? And I mean, I don't want to be all techno-optimistic, right?
Yeah.
But there is a sense that what is basically in our own way is our unwillingness to say yes. So you look at the metro, look at the children's hospital, look at national broadband, look at all these schemes, look at the Lewis Dublin Port Tunnel. All of them are overrun.
Yeah.
In terms of time and budget.
Yeah.
So you think, okay, what is going on here? Why has something happened deep in the society or the public administration that means that things that used to take 2 years take 10 years? And why have we as a society accepted that and tolerated it? I mean, the Metro link, do you know the Metro thing was supposed to be built by now?
Yeah.
The 5 billion was supposed to be the initial estimate of the cost, right? And it was supposed to be built and completed by 2021. The latest estimate of the cost is 10 billion, but 23 billion if everything goes wrong. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right? So if there's delays, so if everything goes wrong, you're building in contingency for no rather than contingency for yes.
Yeah.
It was meant to be completed by 2027. Now it's estimated it'll be completed by 2035. So
right. Yeah. There's something seriously wrong.
There is something seriously wrong.
Yeah.
And I think what is wrong is a mindset shift. We spoke about this new book by Ezra Klein on abundance in America that I think is out this week. And there's a lot of talk about it, but I think it's important to come back to it. The mindset shift in Ireland has to be, we are going from a world, take energy, for example, of scarcity to a world of abundance. We are going from a world things cannot be done to a world where things can be done. And we need to go from a world of saying no to saying yes. But then the question is, where are the naysayer bottlenecks? So I'll give you an example. Even here around where we live, there are people complaining about a school that is going to be built. It's impossible in all conscience, in my opinion, to object to a school. I think like a school is...
They're building it because it's needed.
But it's to educate kids. It's to change. So where does this sort of NIMBYism come from, and how has it become so affected? And how is it? It's like a virus that's infected us. You know. And you look at other countries, like I'll give you an example, right? Singapore,
Yeah.
John, which is a tiny, tiny place, highly dense population, builds, as a matter of course, 20,000 units for poorer people every year. It just does it, right?
Right.
There's no shouting and roaring. There's no dull debates on whether somebody should sort of have speaker rights
Yeah.
or not. They just do it. Japan, Tokyo, builds 100,000 units a year as a matter of course.
Wow.
But just keeps building.
And
building,
are these
building.
government built?
Everything is usually in the private sector. But
Right.
the government
Okay.
in Singapore owns the land. That's the interesting thing.
Right.
So there is no massive speculation on land prices because the government owns the land and releases the land,
Yeah.
which is kind of a very socialist way of doing things in a hyper-capitalist country.
Yeah.
Because they've realized, look, we have to control this sort of thing. In Japan, it's all private sector, but it works. I mean, the Japanese regard houses a wee bit like they regard cars,
Yeah.
which is they reach obsolescence. So Japanese houses and home building is all dictated by the acceleration of technology and materials and figuring things out and space and units and all that sort of stuff, which is why a lot of Japanese cities look very weird because there's no old buildings.
Yes.
Whereas we in Ireland have a fetish with the old.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like we
yeah.
preserve things from hundreds of years ago as if they are by definition better. So it's a sort of anti-technological
Yeah.
approach, right?
Yeah.
So what we're doing is, it'd be a bit like saying, see that Hillman Hunter that you had in 1972?
Yeah.
Because we did have a Hillman
Yeah,
Hunter.
I remember
right?
it well.
Okay. See that Hillman Hunter?
Beige
That
it was.
it was beige. Oh, my dad's taste in. It was kind of orangey beige. It was
Yeah,
even
yeah,
worse.
yeah,
It was like, it was a beautiful creature from the 1970s.
Glowing beige.
Yeah, it was like the car that the really shit criminals in Starsky and Hutch didn't have. Right. So think about, we are at this age where, imagine if we had said that in 1972, the Hillman Hunter constitutes the pinnacle of technological advancement. And everything that's built after that is less good.
Yeah.
That's the way we are with houses. So old houses in Ireland
Yeah.
sell for more than new houses.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because we have this fetish with the old. Whereas the whole progress of humanity is embracing the new.
Yeah.
And we don't do that. And then you think of NIMBYism. This comes from, I think, a class obsession to preserve what we have from other people who are not really like us. Right? That's what I
How
think
do you
it
mean?
comes. I think it's a big fear that, poorer people will move into the area, different colored people move into the area, all that sort of stuff. You rarely get huge, motivated residence committees opposing a large house.
Yeah.
But 1,000 little houses, that's what you get.
Yeah.
It's as if humanity is bad and isolation is good.
Yeah.
And of course, when you have a growing population, that is a recipe for planning chaos.
Yeah.
Basically, saying yes is a normal way of what economists call supply side economics,
Okay.
right?
Let's talk about this further after this.
Okay.
So this lack of progress and lack of ability to say yes,
Or even willingness to say
willingness to say yes. You talk about management and managing projects and stuff. Like, we have one of the highest proportions of university graduates all doing engineering and law and this, that, and all the rest. Yet we can't seem to solve this.
Yeah.
What's
It's
going on
fascinating,
there?
Right. So basically, at the moment, Ireland is obsessing as a passive player in the global world about tariffs that are going to be imposed by somebody we've no control over. So the question then is, do you use the crisis of tariffs to change the stuff you do have control over?
Yeah.
Right. So this is why the idea of saying yes, right? And what you do have control over is the ease at which you embrace building change, for example. Now, saying yes has been, which is a very basic
Yeah.
human instinct. Economists, of course, have mangled this and have turned it into something called supply side economics.
Right.
It's just means saying yes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which means is opening up the possibility.
Yeah.
So John, I'll talk about the supply side. Traditionally in Ireland, the excuse for not doing things was we didn't have money. So we didn't have sufficient demand. So it was a demand problem, and lots of economic commentary and lots of economic commentators, and particularly political classes, have latched onto this idea that everything is either demand deficient, which means you just create more demand and you solve the problem.
Yeah.
You throw money at the problem. I'll give you a figure. Irish public spending has risen by 47% in 5 years,
Wow.
right? It's gone from 71 billion a year
Yeah.
to 105 billion a year.
This is a lot of bicycle sheds.
That's a lot of bicycle sheds. That's a lot of bicycles. So the question is, why, if there's so much money sloshing around, do things not get done? And the reason is we are focused on the wrong disease. The disease is not demand driven. There's plenty of demand, maybe too much demand. The disease is supply driven. There's not enough supply. And what does that mean? It means things can't be opened up. Things can't be loosened up.
Yeah.
Now, why is there not enough supply? Because I think at critical choke points in the economy, the public administration that is running this place doesn't have the highest standards. Back to my friends at Irish Rail.
Yeah.
Why is the Jacks in Irish Rail a disgrace and the Jacks in Austrian Rail pristine? Because somebody is actually taking control and saying, you know what, we're going to achieve higher standards, not lower standards.
And there's an element of pride in that as well.
Pride, exactly. Just pride in your work, pride in your environment, all that sort of stuff. And that comes from a mindset. So why did the Singaporeans build more houses? Because they can.
Yeah.
Why can they? Because they want to. Because they've dispensed with all objections. They've dispensed with all those impediments to development. And they said, you know what? It is better that we have affordable prices for young couples, or not even couples, for young people, than somebody has a view on the sea. Or somebody has, right?
Yeah.
They've decided that there's a thing called the public good.
Yeah.
And in the public good, the idea that the objector has all the rights is regarded as laughable.
Yes.
Because there is a public sense. And then once you have a public good, you have a public sense of community. Once you have a public sense of community, things that are going to benefit the majority get done, right? Here, we have extraordinary inability to do anything that requires us to build substantially because somebody's going to be inconvenienced.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's broadband, electricity, all the stuff we're talking about. Like, so for example, like, just take even public transport, right? The Dublin-Cork train takes 2.5 hours. If the train were to go at 200k an hour, it would take 1 hour.
Yes.
What does that require? You have to build new lines, not old lines. You have to build a whole new system. So you've got to say, okay, there is one old train line. That'll be okay for regional trains that stop every 20 miles.
Yeah.
But we'll just build another line beside it on open land where there's nothing but green fields and hedges and cows looking at you. Okay?
Yeah.
Right. Just do it. And then, of course, what happens in Ireland is rather than doing things, we come up with lovely little graphs and pictures.
Yeah.
Project 2030.
Yeah.
Which is an aspiration. I have many aspirations, some of which I wouldn't even admit in public, John, to do things, right? But the question is just do them. So what I'll just conclude is in an era of technological advancement, there is a great example in Ireland of how to do things, which is the multinational companies. So here in Ireland, you have companies that are operating at the top of their game internationally, right? They have Irish graduates working in them. They have foreign graduates working in them. And they are adopting technology at a rate that is not just commensurate with Asian or American technology firms and our production processes or our manufacturing, but surpasses them, which is why Donald can't stand us, because we're better at this shit than they are, right?
Yeah.
How can you have this part of the economy roaring ahead and the other part of the economy, the public part of the economy, consistently saying no?
Yeah.
What it is a mindset problem. It's not a problem of ability, because the same people are working, the same Irish humans are working in one area and another. How come one set are hyper productive and the other set are saying no? It has to be that the culture in the public administration, in the planning process, in all these choke points, it's the culture is destroying the people, not the people destroying the culture. And that is why I talk about the Molly Bloom approach. Just say yes. and be open and embrace the future, because there's never been a more legitimate time to be optimistic, but there's also never been a worse time to be pessimistic and be a naysayer, because other countries will embrace the technologies and they're not waiting around for us. Nobody is waiting for Ireland to get its act together. It's up to us. And we leave it there.
Yes.